Everything's changing in PR these days. So now what? Founders are told to nail the 3 minute pitch, and plenty of them do. But the pitch is only the first 3 minutes of a much longer conversation. Today, we're talking about what happens on both sides of that room, how to make a short pitch land, and what investors, customers, and reporters will find when they go looking for you afterward.
Hey, Tiffany, totally excited for today's conversation. I think it's been a while since we have last talked, and this is always a fun one to talk about founders and startups.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've been sitting in a lot of pitch rooms this year. What are you seeing when founders get up there?
I am seeing a lot of different things. So let me set the stage a little bit of what that pitch room looks like. Oftentimes there's a stage, there's maybe 4 or 5, maybe even 10 investors up there. And then there's an audience. And I've seen that range anywhere from 100, maybe even 20 people to, let's say, 400 people. And then you've got anywhere from 10 to 30 startups that get their 30 minutes of fame to stand up there and pique interest. And really, they're up there to try to get investors to give them that next meeting, right? So what I see is that they are trying to cram too much into such a small amount of time. You don't have the time to dive into the market, deep dive into the tech, the competition, the various potential business models you've thought of. You really need to nail it in that 3 minutes. This is not a 45-minute investor pitch. So one analogy that's quite nice and pretty easy to hang on to is the movie trailer versus the movie, right? So we've all seen a movie trailer and we all like, oh yeah, I see it. Oh, I want to see that movie now. Or no, not really interested, not for me. And moving on. So that you really need to think about that 3-minute founder, startup pitch as what's going to pique that interest? What is going to get this investor to be like, okay, tell me more. Maybe not today, but tell me more next week. And, so that's really one thing that has stood out for me this year.
I love that framing of this as the movie trailer versus the actual full-length feature film, because you're so right. And I think that really does land with early stage founders. And so, let's say they go into those pitches and they do well and it lands. And, an investor walks out of that room and they're like, I've got to look this person up. I need to learn more about this new company. What are they going to find when they get to that point? And I think that is where that sort of the backfill, like where they start to investigate and learn a little bit more about this early stage startup that they saw or this movie trailer that they heard on stage, and they want to go deeper and who's the star of the show and what is their background and am I going to like this movie? And so I think it's really important to think about what investors and others who happen to be in the room are going to see when they go and look that up. And that's often what, a quick Google search, maybe a quick AI search, and it's finding LinkedIn profiles that are sometimes out of date, not really maintained. They might land on a website that doesn't paint the full picture of what investors need to learn about early on about who they might be investing in and where they're going to be spending their money. And so it's interesting because we've moved from how Googleable are you, right? To, the fact that people are using AI assistants kind of learn about topics, industries, people, companies, you name it. And what we're finding and what some of the research in this space is finding is that the LLMs are often pulling from company information, that owned content. And when you're really early on, either in your career or in your startup journey, there's often not a lot there for them to grab onto to know if they want to buy the movie ticket, right? And go to the next stage and book that meeting. So how many pitches have you sat through this year? And when they go well, what's that common thread?
It has been so many. So, off the top of my head, I've probably heard at least 100 pitches this year because some events are large and you just get the opportunity to, be there for 4 or 5 hours and listen to several different industries go through their pitches. And then you get to hear the follow-up questions. What are the investors asking afterwards? And that's, sort of my gauge right now to say what landed well and what lands well. Because one thing I feel, first I'm going to say what doesn't hit sometimes is that they miss telling who is doing this, who are the founders and what is the team. Because almost every time afterwards, the investor will be like, so who's doing this? Why is this the team that's successful? Right? Because assume that the investor knows the industry a bit, assume that the investor is pretty on top of technology. And so, yes, you want to dig into the what you're doing. You want to dig into the why you're doing it. But then you really need to hit the who. And those are the people, those are the pitches that land really well. And then finish off with the when. When's this going to happen? How long is this going to take? So, what, why, who, when. It's a little opposite of what we're used to thinking about, but that's what has tended to land. And then, of course, we can't knock stage presence. We can't knock practice, right? You can tell somebody who's quite nervous, and it's perfectly understandable to be that. And that's a very forgiving space to do that. But you can also tell who might not have ever practiced what they're about to say before, those types of things. And I think that's what really, really lands well. One personal pet peeve is that folks get up there and their logo is maybe on page 1 of their presentation and you never see it again. Well, imagine you're seeing 30 pitches that day and you're hearing something and you're like, oh, what was this company name again? And then they're on to 30 seconds into the pitch and don't know the company name because the logo is not there. Super simple thing, but definitely make sure that logo and the name of the company is shown or at least mentioned throughout a presentation because you're seeing a lot of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting, like your focus areas that you're talking about, because in those 3 short minutes or 5 minutes or whatever that really constrained timeline might be, there is that inclination to just want to kind of speed through a pitch and go really rapid fire rather than pulling out what's really important for the investors in that particular room on that particular day. And so, one of the things that we coach folks on when we talk to early stage founders is that, that information, all of that other context still is important and needs to live somewhere, right? And so oftentimes, or typically, like that information, that additional context is through, owned and earned media. Well, early stage folks are not going to have a lot of that earned media and that press coverage, but they have the opportunity, and it's really easy to really kind of own their story and own their content. So I think it's really important for folks to focus on that 3-minute pitch with those really, really clear deliverables, but then to ensure that the really important information beyond the pitch lives somewhere that is findable and searchable. And it's as easy as creating a blog, right? Most startups, if not all, they're going to have a website. This is really low hanging fruit. You can create a blog and your posts can then be repurposed in a number of different ways. It can be LinkedIn content and so on. And I think sometimes people think it's like, well, I'm really busy with build mode. I don't have time to be a content creator. And that's not at all what we're advocating for. This isn't about just being a content calendar that you're working towards, but rather being part of the story. And there's so much more that goes into who these founders are and why they started. And generating ideas for the content is really surrounded around that, and starting with the origin story, how you got started, why you got started, what in your last job prompted you to want to come up with a solution and leave that job and start this company, right? That in and of itself is an amazing story. But a blog is also an opportunity for our founders to really distinguish themselves as subject matter experts in a particular space, to have a point of view that lives somewhere around the market conditions or the regulatory conditions, and to kind of be able to speak to that, and then to make predictions about what's happening in the market, and to really have a platform, a very easy platform to create, right? Where the, investors, when they search your name, are going to get directed to your website, which will have the blog, and that will get pickup. So I think there's a real opportunity for founders outside of the pitch room and all of that preparation they do to create this supporting apparatus around their context so they can focus right on what investors want to hear in those particular meetings.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because when you mentioned that founder story, that's definitely something that was a dominant theme throughout those pitch presentations that I sat in. And you can assume that an investor who is interested, or an audience member who's interested, or somebody you network with who's interested, is going to go check out your website, maybe dig into your LinkedIn page. So you don't need to go crazy. It is overwhelming, right? You don't need to be a marketer from day one. You are building a product, totally get that. But you need to have something there. And the founder story is mission critical. The why you're doing this is mission critical. I was chatting with somebody who they weren't quite ready for PR, and I took a look at their LinkedIn page for them, and in his personal page and in the website. And those 3 elements were really missing. There was no activity on LinkedIn, and there was just not a lot of substance even on the website. And I said, if you do anything, between now and next, when you're ready ready to dig into marketing, PR, just start with some activity. Start with nailing down that founder story and get it on your website. Start with, having a presence, having an opinion, because that's what's going to differentiate you from another startup. And that's what's going to entice an investor, right? Because an investor wants to, you're doing something different than everyone else in a different way. And this is really exciting. And how are you going to do that outside of that pitch or even a longer pitch that you might have to an investor down the road? You have to have that presence on LinkedIn. And you have to have that presence, on your website. And like you said, you have to start leaning into what are those blog topics. And again, I get it. You're in build mode. You don't need to go crazy like later on down the road when you're focused on that more. But it really helps set the stage and foundation to make life a lot more smooth when, things are moving fast.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I think people think that like communications or strategic comms plan or public relations starts right before you're about to launch your product, or maybe right when you're about to go for, Series A funding. And that's too late to start this process. You've got to start it as early as possible and create that cadence and build up the content that is meaningful and authentic. Again, like you said, it doesn't have to be completely overwhelming. Once a week, twice a month, having a point of view, a position that you're sharing that is easily findable. If you've got a customer base, it could also be as easy as making sure that you're staying in contact with them through a newsletter format and repurposing the content that you're creating for the different channels so that it feels like a lot, but you're really just sourcing from one or two topics in a given month. And the foundation work that you do at this early stage, it's not only for the investors in the room, although I know that that's the main focus for a lot of founders right now, as it should be, but it builds up reputation and a point of view. Sprinkle in a few videos. What you're doing is you're building a foundation for what your customers see and how they're getting to know you and how they want to engage with you, but also for when you are ready to have an announcement and we want to go out and we want to pitch that announcement, whether it's partnership announcements, funding announcements, a big product launch or a big pivot, that it's not the first time or the first piece of news that a reporter is seeing about you, that they can go back in and go, oh, I like this person's tone of voice or where they're coming from. And then there's obviously all of the podcasting opportunities that are out there as well. So if you're a subject matter expert, you have to start somewhere by sharing that point of view and getting that out there. And podcasters are looking at that when they're considering who they might have on as guests on their shows. And so it's really foundational for founders to think about how they're communicating with all the elements of their audience early and often enough to be meaningful for them.
Yeah, you made a super good point, right? Because when do we get a call? We get a call when I'm about to launch in a month. We need PR.
My favorite. That's my favorite.
We're here for you, yes, but oh my gosh, like so much foundational work is typically not done, right? So this is often the first time somebody's thought about comms, and maybe they've done some marketing, maybe they've done some events, hopefully they've done some work on their pitch deck, but it is often the first time they've given comms much of a thought. And I'm not going to say it's too late, because it's never too late to get started, but if I were giving advice to my best friend starting a company, I'd be like, start early. I mean, almost start before you even have a website. Who are we? What are we? You're going to change. You're going to evolve. That message is going to, grow with the company, but your founder story will be the same. Why you're doing it is at least the same. And it's really important work to do in the beginning. And, then again, like we said before, you don't go crazy, but at least so when it does come time to launch, there's something in place. And like you said, reporters, they're moving fast. They're writing stories and they're putting things out there. And sometimes they don't even have time for interviews, right? They're going to go to your website. They're going to pull information. They're going to, the press release, we all love the press release, but it tells a story, right? Your website or your LinkedIn page, or somebody should be able to piece together the story of who you are rather quickly without having to, give you a call or dig into that. So that's work that could be done along the way. I think of it almost as your own little company historian, right?
Yeah, a journal. Yeah. You're journaling about your story. Yeah.
Journaling your journey of the company. And that is your historian. And that really is going to matter. It's going to matter more than you think it's going to matter.
Yeah.
when it comes time to launch or come out of stealth mode or something like that.
And I think it's important to know that like quality over quantity
Mhm.
is important here. Like make sure it's worth reading and that it's in your own voice. And I think some people think like, oh, I'll just have AI write all my blog posts. And that's not really the point, right? The point is to understand who the founders are, who the early technology advisors are in a startup, who they're bringing on board and why, and then there's that personality component that really comes through what you can do with your own content that you have control over that lives on your site is that you can show your judgment, you can show your connectedness to the market and understanding like what's happening around you, because it's really easy to stay in your builder bubble for a long time because you've got a lot of work to do. You're hustling. It's crazy hours as a startup founder, but understanding also what's going on in the market and demonstrating that you know what's coming along and thinking about like how things that are happening in the news cycles or regulatory changes or maybe what bigger players in adjacent industries are doing and how that affects your business and what you're doing, but also how does it affect your customer base and how do you connect with your customers on that level builds that depth of knowledge. Because when we do start to go out and do comms, it's not just about here's my company, here's what I do, here's how we're great. But where leaders really get traction is as thought leaders down the road and how they think about problems and solutions and their role in that and their industry's role in those things. That's where we really kind of build up a lot of credibility over time. And it starts small. It starts with blogs and early podcast appearances and attending events. And it has just this domino effect for founders that really engage and take advantage of those opportunities as they come their way.
Yep, definitely agree. Start soon. Don't wait until launch day.
All right, so no, this is all really good information, and it's kind of overwhelming to think about all the things that people could be doing. But I'm just really curious to know if you were prepping a founder for a pitch in the next month, what's one thing you would tell them?
What is the one thing that you would want someone to remember about your pitch? One thing. Assume that we're going to forget all the pitches that we saw, and you really do sort of forget a lot. So what's the one thing, I remember someone was up there. I mean, animals are always appealing, but personal stories, right? Why I'm doing this because my mom is battling diabetes, or those stories matter because they stick. They help people take away why this company is doing something cool, or why this company is doing something innovative, why this company potentially could change the world. So my only advice is, what do you want someone to remember about you? And then reverse engineer your 3 minutes from there, because then they will. Right. And it's okay to go slow. It's okay to pause. It's okay to repeat a little bit. Right. People are just trying to cram it all in. And I'm so guilty of that, talking fast once, I'm up on stage or a mic is in front of my face. And that's why practice is good. So, what do you want people to remember about you? And then go look in that mirror or record yourself. Obviously, we could do that these days and practice, and then think through what might be those questions that investor might have afterwards, because then you have an opportunity to dig into things a little even more in depth. By far, what do you want people to remember? If only one thing, what would it be? And go reverse engineer from there.
Yeah. I love that. I think my favorite tip for early stage founders, especially when it comes to like creating content, is just this idea that like you founded a company for a reason, a lot, kind of based on what you're talking about. And that story alone is really kind of enough to get somebody started. And I think if they just start writing that down, or even just doing like a voice recording and then, taking notes on it, that they'll find that they will easily have 3, 4, 5 more topics to talk about. And it's just a place to get started. And so starting, with that origin story and really kind of tracking that from the beginning, because those things also do come back around in the comms front later on. Like, how have you changed when you were first a founder and, you started out on this journey with this problem in mind and this solution, and 6, 12, 18 months down the road, what's been that evolution of that thought process and your approach to solving this problem that you identified, and now your solution, and what was that your thought process in between that? And that, I think, is really telling for people that are thinking about making an investment or sharing your story on your behalf with others. So, just come back to the roots of, why you started, and just start documenting it.
You reminded me when you were saying that, a couple investors I spoke with, I was asking, what could these startups do better? What could these founders do better, because obviously I would like to be able to have that advice to give to our clients. And one thing he said was do that comms work early. So as we were talking through this, I was like, yeah, that foundational work, even investors are saying, because here's what happens. They think they have a great idea,
Yeah.
but they really haven't even tested it much with customers or the messaging or dug into what the media landscape even is. That's easy work, right? You can get that analysis. You can dig into what's even out there already. But so often founders get caught in their own idea and they don't do that work. And so then they are pivoting 6 months later. They are pivoting, a year later because they didn't do that early comms. They didn't do that early research. They didn't do that really. They just had a great idea. They are the most exciting people because they are so passionate about this work that they're doing. But it's like, you don't want to be like, hey, slow down. But you do want to remind founders to just do that homework. What's
Yeah.
our
Seek feedback and seek it often, right?
often,
And
yeah,
yeah.
and tweak
Yeah.
and pivot, and don't be afraid to shift. But the more of that work you do in the beginning, the less
Yeah.
you're going to have to pivot down the road when you're 6 months into development or a year into development. So that was definitely some advice given to me to give to founders.
I love that. And I think one of the things you mentioned earlier too in our discussion is the practice component. And I think where people can get practice is turning their content into these short, video snippets and talking directly to their audience. It's easy to create a 30 to 60-second video that can go up on LinkedIn and get embedded into a blog post. And it's really good early practice for the podcasting down the road or media interviews, and hopefully for, bigger stages, whether it's pitch competitions or you're speaking as a subject matter expert at an event, because, like you said, practice is really key, but you also want to meet your audiences where they're at. And sometimes that's not a blog, and it may be a quick video that they want to watch or something that they want to listen to, while they're commuting or what have you. So yeah, another avenue for practice for sure.
And so often founders are not they're not always the best spokesperson because maybe they're the scientist who has this great idea. I've heard this one guy, he's like, I'm a scientist, I don't want to be a CEO. Well, no, you got to be a CEO if you're going to start building a company. So it's not a comfortable zone for everybody to get up on stage and articulate the vision. And that is why the practice in the various forms, the networking, just networking, telling that 3-minute pitch to people, you're moving around a room getting to know, all that pays off. And all of that is the early homework to help set that stage and storytelling, telling the story of your company moving forward. But I think it's just not always a comfortable zone for folks. And that's where I think bringing on, an early person who, at least somebody who's dedicated to thinking about it. You don't always, obviously you don't have staff to bring on a full-time marketer or a full-time that, but someone on the team has got to be somewhat in charge of, hey, I'm owning this storytelling part of it. And it may not be my comfort zone, but, I'll call on my friendly PR marketer for help or advice, which we do. We know that not every client is ready. I'm always happy to go to these events and offer advice and take a look at someone's LinkedIn page. It's important because down the line, hopefully they do want to come back and are more ready for comms.
Yeah. You bring up a good point. There are a lot of mentors out there, be it informal or formal mentor programs. It's just reaching out and talking to somebody that is a subject matter expert in, the storytelling component or early days marketing, what to prioritize and what not to worry about, and just to bounce those ideas off of. I think that's so key. We don't build these things in a silo. We don't build 100% of this stuff on our own. And so reaching out and asking for help, I think is really important.
Yeah, exactly. Getting your little advisors in the different areas that you just might not be an expert in because you're the one who has this brilliant idea to launch this product or new technology or new medicine or something like that. So yeah, you don't have to take it all on, but you do have to get the advice, and counsel is definitely a must-have.
Well, I think we have covered a lot today about founder readiness when it comes to comms. Anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up today?
Yeah, no, this is such a good conversation, and I think it was fun to have because I know you've got some big events coming up and that you're attending in Hawaii and falls around the corner. We're going to have Tech
Yep.
Week in San Francisco and all of that. So I'm always curious, like, what are you seeing on the tech scene in Hawaii these days?
Yeah, seeing a lot of really cool things. You know, like you said, Hawaii Tech Week is coming up August 31st through September 5th. And it's a great time to kind of get together and connect with people that have been building for a while, but also then seeing what folks are building right now that's new and fresh and really kind of innovative. So on the Hawaii tech scene, we're seeing a lot more when it comes to ocean tech, whether it's like, you know, flood or water, you know, mitigation, to sustainable agriculture in the ocean from, you know, algae and oysters. And I mean, there's just so many cool things that are happening kind of, I think, in that space. And so we're going to see some fun stuff coming out of Tech Week around that. The cool thing about tech in Hawaii is that it's an incredibly supportive environment. We're a small state, and then we're also kind of separated into several different islands, but we all kind of show up for each other. And whether it's at like the big conference that happens earlier in the year, East Meets West, or whether it's us all prepping for Tech Week, I think it's the collaboration that you see that is really fun and unique and supportive about tech here in Hawaii.
Yeah, I've loved watching that and I found it inspirational. And I wanted you to share that because I think that's exactly what we would advise founders to do, right? Get involved in a certain part of the community, get involved with folks who can be collaborative and help advise and show up for you because it really matters at that stage. So, you know, surround yourself with that network of folks who are on your team, whether, you know, it's figuratively or literally. And I think it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, I agree. Awesome. Thank you so much for the conversation today, Michelle. This was really fun.
Thank you.